According to General Hospital teasers, Stella Henry may be admitted to the hospital following her arrest. Will Drew Kane's vindictiveness lead to a stroke emergency? Drew went after Stella because he wanted to make Curtis Ashford pay, yet Stella is the one who is suffering the most now. Stella may lose her job and possibly prison time now that the investigation into medical insurance fraud has begun. Stella will experience feelings of panic following her arrest. The truth of Stella's situation will hit her hard and cause her to become increasingly concerned. Stella will express her concerns to someone later in the week of August 25th to 29th, so she will undoubtedly be nervous. Depending on where the GH writers want to take this plot, it could cause problems for Stella's health. Stella has had strokes in the past, so it could be time for another one. It's easy to imagine Stella's stress levels rising and potentially triggering another big medical catastrophe. Stella could end up in the hospital as a result of her arrest, leaving her loved ones concerned. Stella's life could be on the line at GH if she has a stroke and requires immediate medical assistance. You can bet Curtis, Portia Robinson, Trina Robinson, and even Kai Taylor will be furious if Drew initiates the stroke with his nasty conduct. Martin Gray may become increasingly angrier with Drew. Drew clearly exceeded a boundary he shouldn't have when he targeted Stella, and he may face vengeance of his own. What about Stella? What is her future? Will Stella suffer a stroke or some other medical issue to deal with? Although Stella will face hefty charges, her health may be more important if things go wrong. According to General Hospital spoilers, Drew's callous acts will result in some unexpected outcomes. According to General Hospital spoilers, it's only a matter of time before someone takes action and shoots Drew Kane. Everyone in Port Charles has a reason to want Drew dead, and someone will undoubtedly pull the trigger to ensure Drew's demise. Drew, on the other hand, had a chance of survival, and the cause for his heinous behavior would be exposed. Drew Kane transported to General Hospital after being shot. Drew would be discovered by someone, presumably Scout Kane, and transported to the hospital. The doctors, notably Dr. Portia Robinson, who has her own reasons for wanting him dead, would work on Drew, who is struggling to stay alive. Drew could have suffered serious injuries as a result of the bullet, and it could be a close call for some time. Everyone is surprised when Drew Kane survives being shot. Most people in Port Charles want Drew dead and don't expect him to survive being shot. Drew survives after many surgeries, which would surprise everyone. Everyone in Port Charles would gain from Drew's death since they would no longer have to deal with his threats and blackmail attempts. Drew living is the worst-case scenario for many, yet there may be something unexpected that explains Drew Kane's unscrupulous actions. Portia Robinson discovers Drew Kane has a brain tumor after assessing Drew and seeing that he has symptoms that do not correspond to a gunshot wound. Portia was able to perform an investigation and make a surprising discovery. Drew has a very large tumor in his brain. They need to operate and remove the tumor. Portia would explain to Curtis Ashford that Drew's sudden alterations could be the result of a brain tumor, which has been causing him to act thus horribly for quite some time. Curtis might be astonished at first, but he eventually comes to believe it makes sense. Drew Kane's brain tumor is removed. Drew undergoes surgery to have his brain tumor removed, and many in Port Charles wonder if the old Drew will return once the tumor is removed. Is the tumor to blame for Drew's entire personality transformation, or is there something else going on here? The operation is long and difficult, but Drew lives and emerges from surgery. Will Drew be able to return to his normal self now that the tumor has been removed? What do you think? What are your thoughts? Do you believe Drew will get shot? Will it be revealed that Drew has a brain tumor? Will Drew be able to resume his normal activities once the tumor has been removed? Keep watching General Hospital, weekdays on ABC, to find out what happens next. Don't forget to come back here for all the newest General Hospital information, news, and spoilers. Stella had always been the type of woman who wore her strength like armor, a figure in Port Charles who never let people see the flaws beneath her exterior. But tonight, everything seemed to shatter at once. The arrest was harsh, public, and humiliating, leaving her traumatized in ways she never believed possible. The blazing lights outside the courthouse, the sharp sound of handcuffs snapping shut, the constant clicking of cameras catching every moment, each experience imprinted itself on her memory. She attempted to keep her head high, but her body betrayed her. Minutes after being released from detention, she fainted, clutching her chest as panic spread among the tiny gathering. Drew, who was standing close, had not anticipated things to escalate so quickly. What started as a planned push for control had turned into something darker than he had imagined. He had sought to reveal Stella's involvement in actions that he believed had weakened him, but he hadn't considered the emotional toll on her. Now, as she lay asleep on the chilly hospital gurney, he felt a peculiar mix of remorse and wrath swirling inside him. He couldn't help but worry if he'd finally gone too far, if his desire to show himself had passed a boundary that he couldn't reverse. At General Hospital, commotion ensued as medics rushed Stella to the trauma bay. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, her speech slurred after regaining consciousness, and her right hand twitched uncontrollably. The words "possible stroke" were spoken urgently between nurses, triggering a series of operations. Portia came moments later, her face filled with panic as she sought answers from anyone who would speak with her. Stella was more than just a patient to her, she was family, someone she could rely on, someone who had stuck with her through difficult times. And now, with monitors buzzing and N4 flowing continuously, the prospect of losing her was awful. Curtis was the second to arrive, his face contorted with rage he strained to control. He confronted Drew in the corridor with a low but deadly voice. "You couldn't let it go, could you?" Curtis remarked, his eyes filled with suppressed rage. "You just had to push her until she broke." Drew attempted to justify himself, claiming that Stella had made decisions that impacted everyone and that exposing her was the only way ahead. Even in his own ears, the words rang empty. Curtis didn't believe it, and neither did Portia, who had walked out to stand behind him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Inside the room, the atmosphere was tight. Stella's breathing was shallow, her skin pallid, and the sound of her faint pulse filled the space between machine alarms. TJ, attempting to remain cool as a doctor rather than a grieving family member, oversaw her treatment and ordered scans to confirm what everyone suspected. He understood that every second counted. If it was a stroke, they didn't have much time to intervene, and they couldn't afford to be hesitant. Despite the professional precision, his heart was breaking. It was almost difficult to see Stella, the lively, strong-willed woman who had shaped so much of his life, in such precarious condition. Word quickly traveled throughout the hospital, and people began to congregate. Jordan appeared, her mouth set, her remorse intertwined with her will to be strong for her family. She and Stella had shared more than history, they had shared trust, and she was now wondering if her silence on certain issues had contributed to the downward spiral that had led them here. Nina and Sunny found themselves on the periphery of the unfolding drama, each watching the aftermath with mixed feelings. Sunny felt a surge of protectiveness. Stella had been there for his family in the past, and seeing her suffer made him quietly promise to keep Drew's machinations under control. Meanwhile, Drew wandered the corridor, unable to escape the weight of his own judgments. He told himself that everything he'd done recently was about justice and restoring balance where he thought power had been abused. But, deep down, he understood his acts were motivated by revenge as much as rationality. He had hoped that revealing Stella's secrets would provide him with power, but it had instead resulted in far-reaching ramifications beyond his control. The image of Curtis pacing, Portia wiping away tears, and TJ clutching a chart like a lifeline gnawed at his conscience. Elizabeth spotted him standing alone and approached warily, sensing the tempest seething beneath his controlled facade. "This isn't just about you and Stella," she explained softly. "People are being hurt, Drew. You need to ask yourself if whatever point you were trying to show was worth this." Her comments ripped through his shields, and for the first time that night, Drew felt actual guilt. But remorse would not change the situation in front of them. Stella's condition was grave, and his choices had helped get her there. Stella's eyes twitched slightly inside the hospital room, and TJ leaned in to gently speak her name. Her voice was faint and broken as she attempted to talk, her words twisted and slurred, but he caught fragments, something about pressure and can't breathe. Portia, standing close, grabbed her hand, muttering reassurances while fighting back tears. It was a chilling reminder that the people they cared about could vanish in an instant, and all the grudges, secrets, and machinations that drove their disputes paled in comparison to a life dangling by a thread. As the night progressed, whispers of suspicion filled the hospital halls. Was this simply the product of stress, or had Drew's unrelenting campaign pushed Stella to her limits? Some thought there was more to the story, that someone had purposefully exacerbated her health behind the scenes. Old rivalries revived in whispered talks, and alliances shifted discreetly as blame began to spread. Curtis, however, refused to leave her side. He pulled up a chair by the bed, clutching her hand tightly and murmuring promises she would not hear. "You're going to get through this, Aunt Stella," he said quietly. "You have to." He was resolved not to let her go without a fight, even as doctors prepared to perform surgery if the scans revealed significant damage. Drew ultimately fled to one of the empty waiting rooms, slumping onto a chair as tiredness sank in. For the first time in days, he relaxed his guard and rested his head in his hands. But peace did not come, only the endless repetition of every decision he had made. He wondered whether he had allowed himself to become someone he didn't recognize, capable of damaging the very connections he had pledged to defend. He knew there was no erasing the harm, no matter how the night ended. By the early hours of the morning, the tests confirmed everyone's suspicions. Stella had suffered a minor but possibly serious stroke. The physicians were able to stabilize her temporarily, but the next few days would be vital. Her recovery would be dependent on immediate therapy, minimum stress, and continuous monitoring. The relief was tempered by the realization that she wasn't out of danger. Curtis and Portia rallied behind her with everything they had. For Drew, it meant addressing a reality he couldn't avoid. The corridors of General Hospital had seen their fair share of tragedy and treachery, but tonight held a different weight. Families were put to the test, secrets were on the verge of unraveling, and trust was tenuous. And as Stella lay mute, her life balancing between fragile hope and heartbreaking loss, everyone in Port Charles was forced to confront the consequences of decisions taken in fury and pain. Whether Drew's vengeance had directly caused this or simply pushed fate in the wrong way, one thing became painfully clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The commotion inside the ER was almost unbearable. Drew lay asleep on the gurney, his breathing shallow, his skin pale, and a puddle of blood forming beneath the hurriedly placed bandages around his abdomen. The gunfire came from an unexpected ambush, but no one expected it to lead to an even more horrifying revelation. As physicians and nurses hurried around, monitors blaring furiously, worry hung heavy in the air. Sam stood near the doorway, her hand placed against her lips as tears threatened to spill, and Carly tried to keep her steady, both scared. Jason was pacing furiously, attempting to keep his emotions in check, but everyone who knew him could see the storm developing behind his gaze. When the trauma surgeon finally stabilized Drew enough to send him for a CT scan, the entire waiting room fell silent, each second stretching into eternity. What began as a desperate effort to save him from the bullet wound rapidly became even more ominous when the radiologist returned with unexpected results. The doctor hesitated, his expression hardening, and everyone's worry level rose. "We found something," he continued softly, his gaze fixed on Sam and Jason. The bullet avoided Drew's vital organs, but the scan found an aberrant tumor in his brain. It's a tumor." The words echoed in the room like a thunderclap. Sam froze totally, her face pale, as her mind raced to grasp what she had just heard. Jason stopped pacing, his entire body tightening, as Carly gasped aloud, her hand shooting to her chest. "A tumor?" Sam muttered, her voice cracking. "What do you mean by tumor? How does it make sense that he came here after being shot?" The doctor stated that the lump appeared to have been growing for a long time, undetected, silent but hazardous, and that the bullet, weirdly enough, may have saved Drew's life by causing its discovery. Without this scan, they may not have discovered it until it was too late. Nonetheless, the news came like a tidal wave, engulfing everyone in doubt and panic. Sam's knees buckled slightly, and Carly slid her into a seat, but her mind raced furiously. The thought of losing Drew all over again was terrible. She reflected on everything they had gone through, the memories he had lost, the years taken from him, the time he battled so hard to restore his identity, and now this. Jason stood silently in the corner, clenching his hands so firmly that his knuckles turned white. He'd been angry with Drew in the past, even jealous, especially of Sam, but none of that mattered right now. The prospect of losing his brother in a way that neither of them could fight made his chest throb with anguish. Hours passed before the surgeon returned with an update. Drew had been stabilized after the gunshot wound and was resting in the ICU, but the tumor demanded quick treatment. The doctor explained the risks: surgery would be hazardous, but waiting may be death. The tumor was pressing perilously near to brain structures responsible for memory, speech, and motor function. Removing it could save his life, but there was also a chance he'd wake up with no memories, or worse, not wake up at all. The room fell silent again as the weight of the decision dawned on everyone. Sam's hands trembled as she dried her tears, murmuring, "We can't lose him, we just can't." When Sam entered Drew's room, she was struck by his fragility. Tubes and monitors encircled him as his chest rose and fell in feeble breaths. For a long time, she couldn't force herself to speak and just stood there staring at him, her heart hurting. Finally, she sat down next to him, gently grasping his hand in hers. "You have to fight," she said through tears. "I know you're tired and you've been through hell, but you can't abandon us like this. You can't leave me, leave Scout, please, Drew, you have to fight." She placed her forehead against the back of his hand, her sobbing muffled by the machine's incessant hum. Jason waited outside the door, silently observing, reluctant to go yet unwilling to interrupt Sam's private time. He leaned against the wall, his jaw tightening as images of their upbringing rushed his mind, their similarities, contrasts, and shared blood. Despite their disagreements and hatred, Drew was still his brother, and the thought of losing him was almost intolerable. He reflected on all the times he could have been there, all the moments lost to wrath and pride, and remorse gnawed at him like an open wound. The news of Drew's health circulated swiftly around Port Charles, and everyone appeared to be impacted. Monica raced to the hospital after learning about the malignancy, her face pale with concern. As Drew's mother and chief of staff, she was torn between her medical skills and her emotions, unable to separate the two. When she came at his bedside, she took his hand with quivering fingers and spoke soothing words that only he could hear, a mother's silent appeal for her son to return to her. "You've survived so much," she whispered quietly, stroking a strand of hair off his brow. "Don't you dare give up on us now." Meanwhile, Carly and Sonny were at differences on what should happen next. Carly demanded that Drew receive the best doctors possible, urging him to be sent to a prestigious neurosurgery clinic in New York. Sonny, on the other hand, cautioned against making hasty judgments without fully assessing the hazards. "He's strong," Sonny said quietly. "He is a fighter. We need to make sure the doctors here understand what they're dealing with before we do anything radical." Carly, frustrated and emotional, snapped back, "We don't have time to wait." This monstrosity is growing within his mind, and every second we waste could cost him his life. The tension between them simmered, but everyone eventually decided that consulting specialists was the safest option. Drew awoke the next morning, sleepy but alert, his hand immediately reaching for the tubes that tethered him to the bed. Sam leaned forward instantly, her heart racing. "You're okay," she said quietly, tears welling up in her eyes. "You're safe." Drew blinked slowly, his voice raspy when he asked what had happened. She hesitated at first, not wanting to overwhelm him, but eventually revealed the tumor. At first, he assumed she was joking, thinking she was attempting to distract him from the gunshot wound, but when he saw the pain in her eyes, he realized the reality. "A tumor," he said gently, as if testing the word, his face deepening as the weight of it hit him. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, silent and distant, deep in meditation. He said quietly and steadily, "I've spent so many years fighting for my life, fighting for my memories, fighting to be a father, a brother, a friend, and now this." Sam squeezed his hand tightly, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "We're going to beat this. You are not alone this time, Drew. I'm here." Drew's expression remained unreadable, his mind racing as he tried to grasp everything: the gunshot, the tumor, the risk of losing everything he had worked so hard to restore. Jason eventually entered the room, his steps halting and his normally stern face buckling under the weight of grief. Drew turned his head slightly, and their eyes met for the first time since the news broke. "I suppose this is karma, huh?" Drew spoke harshly, his voice tinged with fear and wrath. Jason shook his head instantly. "Don't do that," he firmly stated, his voice low but steady. "It's not about the past, Drew. This is not about us. You are my brother. That's all that matters right now." Drew glanced away, swallowing hard, the tension between them still present but tempered by the severity of the circumstances. As the hours passed into days, meetings with professionals began. Drew's situation was evaluated by a leading neurosurgeon, who was forthright about the need for the tumor to be removed as quickly as possible. The longer they delayed, the higher the chances of irreversible harm or unexpected complications. Drew listened closely, his jaw tightening as he considered the hazards. If he underwent the surgery, he risked losing his memories permanently, ruining everything he had battled for. However, if he does not, the tumor may kill him. That night, alone in his hospital bed, Drew peered out the window at the city lights, his mind racing. He reflected on Scout, the life he wanted for her, the people he cared about, and the mistakes he had made. He reflected on the second chance he was given after losing his memories, and the identity he had worked so hard to restore. Then he considered death, the chance that this was the end of his story. Fear grabbed him, but so did determination. He slowly said to himself, "Not yet. I'm not finished yet." Drew made his decision the following morning. When the doctor walked in, he met his stare straight and said, "Schedule the surgery." Sam's breath caught, but she nodded through tears, proud of his bravery even as anxiety clawed at her chest. Jason laid a silent but firm touch on his shoulder, marking a rare moment of brotherly togetherness between them. The plan was set. The war wasn't done, but Drew was prepared to confront it full on. And, while worry hung over everyone who loved him, there was a calm power in the air, an unsaid pledge that whatever occurred, they would face it together. Drew knew one thing for certain in that hospital room, surrounded by family, love, and memories: this wasn't the end of his journey, it was simply another battle, one he planned to win. Sam sat on the edge of his bed, with her hand gently resting on his. She had barely slept, her mind racing with all the things that could go wrong. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined 1,000 different scenarios, none of which ended good. But she knew she had to be strong for him, Scout, and all the memories they had yet to make. Jason stood against the wall, arms crossed, silent yet alert. Despite their convoluted history, his loyalty was evident now. Carly came and went, stressing over minutiae like who would sign the consent paperwork and which specialists would be present during the procedure, but even she couldn't conceal the terror lurking beneath her professional calm. Monica, although being a doctor herself, had been uncharacteristically quiet, standing at Drew's bedside with her hand tightly clutched over his. The mother in her was horrified, and the physician in her understood how perilous this operation would be. At 7:45 a.m., Dr. Michael Reynolds, a famous neurosurgeon flown in from New York, entered the room. His demeanor was dominant, his expression stern but sympathetic. It's time, he whispered softly, staring right at Drew. We're ready for you, Drew said, taking a calm, steady breath before turning his gaze to Sam. Her lower lip shook as she said, "Come back to me." He grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. "I promise," he responded, his voice low and firm. Jason approached, his hand briefly resting on Drew's shoulder, a rare, tacit truce between the brothers. No more old grudges. No more wasting time. As they wheeled Drew into the operating room, Sam followed until she couldn't walk any further, watching helplessly as the double doors swung shut behind him. Her entire world seemed to vanish into that antiseptic, highly illuminated hallway. Inside the operating room, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The constant beeping of monitors, the hum of machinery, and the repetitive shuffle of the surgical team prepping instruments filled the air. Drew was cognizant as they began to prepare him, and despite the chaos, he felt a peculiar sense of serenity. The anesthesiologist leaned in, assuring softly that he would soon fall asleep. Drew gave one last thought to Scout, Sam, and his life, everything he was battling for, before the darkness gently drew him in. Back in the waiting room, the hours passed with torturous slowness. Sam sat curled up in a chair, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Carly paced furiously, as Jason stood in the corner, silent and motionless, his jaw clamped tightly. Monica sat with her hands clenched and her lips squeezed into a narrow line, silently praying but never admitting it aloud. It wasn't long until Sonny entered the room quietly, placing a calming hand on Sam's shoulder. "He's strong," Sonny mumbled. "He'll get through this," but Sam couldn't force herself to respond. Her gaze was fixated on the clock, and each tick sliced deeper into her nerves. After 4 long hours, Dr. Reynolds emerged shortly, still wearing his surgical cap and robe. The whole group jumped to their feet. Sam's voice quivered as she inquired, "What is happening? How is he?" The doctor paused, his expression hardening. "We've effectively accessed the tumor," he informed slowly, "but it's more challenging than we anticipated. It's connected to brain pathways that control memory, speech, and emotions. Removing it fully without causing damage is exceedingly risky." Sam's breath froze in her throat as Jason stepped nearer. "What does that mean?" Jason demanded, his voice calm yet forceful. Dr. Reynolds took a slow breath. "We're going to proceed, but please understand that Drew may wake up different. He could lose memories or aspects of his personality. There's even a chance." He paused. Monica's voice cracked as she said, "There's a chance he won't wake up at all." The silence that ensued was oppressive. Sam's hands rushed to her face, and Carly put her arms around her, attempting to keep her from entirely breaking down. Jason turned away, clenching his jaw, and tried to keep his emotions under control. Sam finally responded, her voice quiet but steady, "Do whatever you need to do. Save him." Back inside the operating room, the tension rose as the surgery approached its most perilous stage. Dr. Reynolds labored attentively, his movements precise and each decision essential. Drew's vitals dropped suddenly, alarms ringing, sending a tremor of panic through the team. Nurses hurried, the anesthesiologist changed drugs, and Reynolds screamed commands quickly. After what seemed like a lifetime, his statistics stabilized, but the close call shocked everyone. Meanwhile, in the waiting area, Sam unconsciously grabbed Jason's hand, wanting an anchor. Jason didn't back away, just hung on, his normally calm expression betraying flashes of panic and shame. "He can't leave us like this," Sam said quietly, almost to herself. Jason nodded slowly, his voice low but firm, and responded, "He won't. He's a fighter." After nearly 7 exhausting hours, the doors finally opened. Dr. Reynolds stepped out, removing his mask. This time, a tiny smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "He made it," he remarked, his voice firm but tired. Relief rushed over the assembly like a tidal wave. Sam sobbed openly and clung to Jason for support. Carly breathed sharply, clutching her hand to her heart, and Monica finally allowed her tears flow freely. However, the relief was short-lived. The doctor went on, "We were able to remove the tumor, but there was some unavoidable trauma to the surrounding tissue. We won't know the full scope of the impact until Drew awakens. It might last hours. It might be days." When Sam was eventually allowed into Drew's room, the sight crushed her heart. He lay motionless, pallid and delicate, his head encased in white bandages, with machines breathing softly beside him. She softly held his hand, tears cascading to the blankets as she said, "You did it. You battled your way back. Please return to me now." Jason stood quietly at the doorway, his heart heavy with emotions he rarely allowed himself to experience. He reflected on all they'd been through, every disagreement and misunderstanding, and silently resolved that if Drew awoke, he'd make things right between them. 2 days later, Drew stirred. His eyes twitched, his breathing increased, and Sam's heart raced up her throat. "Drew," she whispered, leaning in. His lips moved slightly, but no words emerged. His hand twitched weakly, looking for hers, and when their fingers met, a slight smile appeared on his face. But, as relief flowed over Sam, Jason observed something strange in Drew's expression: bewilderment. "Drew, it's me, Sam," she said quietly, her voice shaking with hope. He blinked, his gaze roving aimlessly before eventually landing on her. Instead of recognition, there was only a little frown. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice thin and broken. The room froze. Sam's breath hitched, and Jason tensed instantly, his worst fear realized. Drew didn't recall. The tragic reality dawned on Drew: the surgery had saved his life, but it had also taken away elements of his personality. Drew struggled to understand parts of his history for several days, his recollections flashing inconsistently like a damaged reel of film. Sometimes he remembered Scout's name, and other times he forgot he even had a daughter. His dissatisfaction flared up repeatedly, with wrath and terror engulfing him as he struggled with the shards of his fragmented identity. Sam refused to give up. She spent hours at his bedside, showing him images and narrating stories, hoping to piece him back together. Jason, too, remained close, patient yet attentive, and provided unspoken support for his brother. Carly arranged assistance from the entire family, even pulling ties to bring in the greatest cognitive therapists, while Monica oversaw every aspect of his treatment. But under the surface, darker tensions arose. Drew's trauma and memory gaps reopened ancient wounds, not only between him and Jason, but across the Corinthos family. Long-buried secrets threatened to resurface, as decisions made in the shadows returned to haunt them. Drew's fight was far from finished. Surviving the operation was just the beginning. Now came the more difficult battle: reconstructing his life, retrieving his memories, and confronting the decisions that led him here. And, while the route ahead was uncertain, one thing was certain: Port Charles would never be the same again.